The shattered vows Ilara believed in love. She gave up everything for him, and she was cast out onto the street, pregnant, in the rain. Alone? That night, she was hit by a car. But no one imagined that. That was where her turning point would begin. With a baby in her womb and a strength the world had underestimated, Ilara shivered without knowing why. She stood in front of the mirror, her hand slowly tracing the curve of her 7-month belly. The stretched skin, the larger breasts, the dark circles under her eyes. Everything about her screamed exhaustion. Yet something inside her insisted on reminding her that this was all for love, that all of this had a purpose. Outside, the muffled sound of music rose through the walls. A party. Another one. Julian said they were important for business, for maintaining their image. She only went to keep him company, and out of fear of being left alone. The house was full, but Ilara felt like a disembodied presence floating through a crowded room. She passed through the people as if she were invisible. They smiled, toasted, and made jokes. No one noticed how much she was unraveling inside. 3 years earlier, Julian had promised her she would never cry, that he would make her happy every day, that he would take care of her like no one else had. "With me you will never cry. I'll give you the world." That's what he said, and she believed him. She was young, a dreamer with a soul full of space to get lost in, and she truly got lost. She dropped out of university in her 3rd semester. She argued with her parents. She left home. She took a bus toward a future that only existed in his eyes. At first, Julian was sweet. He brought her coffee in bed, left little notes, and laughed at the silly movies she loved. He worked a lot, but always came back with something in his hand. Flowers, gifts, promises. He had magnetic eyes and a firm voice. When he spoke, she believed, because he made it feel true. But the gestures became strange. The words, shorter. The touch, more distant. The silences began. Long. Uncomfortable. She would ask if everything was okay, and he would reply, "Everything's perfect," without looking up from his phone. Sometimes, he didn't even respond. He'd walk past her as if she were part of the furniture. When she complained, he would turn the situation around. "You're too sensitive. It's hormonal. Just don't get so emotional." Then came the criticisms. Harsh, but disguised as jokes. "You can't talk without getting emotional. Try not to gain so much weight, love. It's for your own good. You just complain. You're starting to sound like your mother." Ilara began to doubt herself. Maybe she was being annoying, exaggerating. Maybe it was the hormones, like he said. She was pregnant after all. Sensitive. Needy. When she tried to talk about how she felt, Julian would shut down. "We'll talk later. Not now. Don't be a pain." And she would fall silent. She would swallow it all down. She was afraid to push too hard and ruin the little that was left. She wanted to keep the peace in the house. The baby needed that. She needed that. The party that night was different. Louder. More crowded. People she didn't even know flowed through the living room with wine glasses, laughing loudly. Ilara tried to look fine. She wore a long black dress, fitted to her belly, pulled her hair back, and put on lipstick. She was insecure, but she made the effort. Julian didn't even notice her. When she appeared on the staircase, he was with Isabella, the new secretary, young, elegant, with that kind of calculated confidence. Isabella looked at Ilara and smiled, like someone sizing up a threat, and she saw none. Ilara tried to approach. She said, "Hello." Julian replied with a nod and turned back to his conversation. The night continued like a slow-motion nightmare. Ilara felt she didn't belong there. She wasn't part of anything anymore. She tried to talk to one or two people, but was soon forgotten between monotonous replies. She sat on the sofa, exhausted. Her back hurt. Her legs, too. No one asked how she was. In the middle of the room, Julian spoke loudly. He joked. He drank. He charmed everyone with his magnetic presence. He was good at that. He knew how to be the center. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, he looked at Alara. He pointed to her with a glass in his hand, and he laughed. Look at how pregnancy destroys a woman. The room erupted in a restrained laughter. Isabella put a hand to her mouth, as if she were shocked, but her eyes gleamed with malice. Alara froze. She stood up slowly, her heart pounding, her cheeks on fire. Julian, please. It was all she could manage to say, a plea so soft it was almost inaudible. He turned to her, his eyes narrowed, and a twisted smile of a man who knows he is winning. You're a nobody now. Alara felt as if the floor had disappeared. Julian put his glass on the table and walked toward her. The entire room watched. He stopped inches from her face. The smell of alcohol. Get out of my house! She didn't respond. She just stood still. An instinct for self-preservation blocking any reaction. He grabbed her arm hard, and he pulled her. Fast. Without warning. The door swung open. The rain outside was fine and freezing. Alara tried to resist, but she was weak. Pregnant. Dazed. Julian shoved her out the door, still holding her wrist. Her heel slipped on the wet entryway. She almost fell. Disappear from my sight, Alara. And the door closed. Locked. Silently. She was left there. In the darkness, with the wind chilling her dress, her hair plastered to her face, her hands on her belly, trying to protect what little she had left. No one came after her. No light turned on. No apology was whispered. It was as if she had never existed. The street was empty. The sound of the party was muffled behind the door. Her silence, deafening. The rain intensified. Her shoes were soaked. Her legs were trembling. She walked slowly to the curb and sat down. The cold of the pavement seeped through her dress and cut her skin like a knife. Her hands trembled. Her heart beat erratically. But what hurt the most was the silence. She sat there for minutes, hours. She didn't know. She had lost track of time. She only felt the weight of her belly, the weight of the rejection, the weight of having nowhere to go. Her face was wet with rain, and with the tears she didn't even notice were falling. It no longer made a difference. Then, she placed both hands on her belly. She pressed gently and whispered, I will protect you, even if no one protects me. Her voice broke at the end, but the promise was made. Through clenched teeth, through sobs, through the pieces. And it was in that exact moment that she realized something inside her still breathed. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't the promise of a perfect life. It was no longer love. It was her, and the life that was growing inside her. The world outside might not see. It might not understand. It might even laugh. But in that instant, alone, wet, broken, Alara discovered a kind of strength she didn't know she had. And that strength was all she had left. A new life rises. Alara didn't remember the impact. Not the car, not the sound, not the pain. Only the cold on her face. The rain mixed with blood, and the sensation of falling, even though she was already lying on the asphalt. Screams, running footsteps, a panicked male voice trying to wake her, and the strong smell of burnt rubber. Ma'am? The voice trembled. Ma'am, can you hear me? Her eyes opened for a second. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. A sharp pain pierced her belly, as if something inside her was moving desperately. And then, everything went white. When she came to, she was being pushed down an overly bright hallway, with lights cutting into her eyes. A nurse was talking to someone, but the voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. There were sounds, movements, but nothing made sense. She tried to lift her arm, but she was immobilized. She felt a weight on her chest, and a fear that bordered on panic. "Easy, Alara. You need to breathe." The female voice sounded firm. A cold touch held her hand. She tried to ask about the baby, but only a raspy sound came from her mouth. "We're doing everything we can, but we have to act now. Do you understand? You're in labor." She barely processed the phrase. Labor? Here? At the hospital? After being thrown out into the street? After everything? Her body trembled uncontrollably, and she no longer knew if it was from fear, pain, or exhaustion. Maybe all of it together. Maybe just pure desperation. When she tried to react, her entire body responded with a brutal, dry contraction, as if something was tearing inside. The nurse yelled for another gurney, and everything became a blur of hands, orders, and internal alarms. "Abdominal trauma. Could the baby be in distress? Bring the portable ultrasound. Blood pressure is dropping. Quick, over here." Alara closed her eyes. She didn't want to die. Not now. Not with her son inside her. Not like this. The delivery room looked like a battlefield. Masks, scalpels, bright lights. Someone held her arms carefully. Another person held her leg. The doctor introduced herself, but her voice was lost in the middle of the pain. And then, for an instant, everything went silent. Not outside. Inside. As if time had stopped, and all that was left was the memory of the night before, the rain, the shove, Julian's phrase echoing endlessly. "You're a nobody now." That phrase seemed to have taken root in her like poison. But no, it wasn't true. It couldn't be, because inside her, something was still fighting. Something still existed. A life. And she needed to bring it into the world. Instinct spoke louder. Between contractions and screams, Alara clung to the only thing she had left. Her promise. She screamed. A torn, desperate animal cry. And she pushed. She pushed with all the accumulated pain of the last months. With the abandonment, the loneliness, the humiliation. She pushed with her eyes closed and her teeth clenched. And then came the sound. A cry. Small, but strong. Alive. Human. For a second, she didn't understand. Then, everything inside her gave way. "It's a boy. He's breathing. Stable pulse. He's okay." The nurse placed him in her arms. A wrinkled baby crying loudly, with closed fists and still red skin. And there, in the middle of the chaos, Alara also cried. But not from fear, not from pain. It was a new kind of cry. A cry of relief. Of 1,000 things mixed together. Of life. She caressed his cheek with her finger and whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "You saved me, before you were even born." He stopped crying for a moment, and he opened his eyes. 2 dark, living points, as if he recognized her. The nurse smiled, but didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The scene said it all. Hours later, now in a quieter room, Alara was sitting, her body still sore, but with her son nestled against her chest. A doctor came in, writing something on a chart. "Father's name?" she asked, without looking up. Alara didn't hesitate. "He died." The doctor finally looked at her, and for a second, their eyes met. But there were no more questions, because sometimes a man dies long before he stops breathing. After she left, Alara was alone again. But now, with a sleeping baby in her arms. And that silence, which used to crush her, now seemed different. almost light. She looked at his little face, his small hands, his fine eyelids, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something akin to peace. But there was also fear, a real, deep fear, because she had nowhere to go, no money, no support. She didn't know what would come next. She only knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore, and that changed everything. As the early morning passed slowly and the hospital corridors grew silent, Ilara stayed there, awake, thinking, remembering every word said, every gesture received, everything she would have to forget or transform. Because now she couldn't afford to fall. Now she was someone's ground, and she couldn't give way. When the baby moved, she cradled him carefully, as if that gesture were her new mission in the world. He sighed, as if to say everything was all right, and even if she didn't know what would come next, she believed him. Even if it was just for that night. A mother's foundation. The impact left marks, but it also revealed something no one saw. Ilara was still alive, and what came next, she would decide. One step at a time, one breath at a time. With a baby on her chest, and a heart that, despite everything, still beat, firm and ready. The hospital room was silent when a nurse came in to check her vital signs. Ilara pretended to be asleep. She no longer had the strength to speak. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. But inside, everything was in motion. A silent whirlpool of fear, confusion, and irresponsibility. The baby slept on her chest, warm from their skin-to-skin contact. She didn't understand how something so small could carry so much weight. So much peace, so much reason to go on. Hours later, she was discharged. No family member came to pick her up. No address to return to. She took the few clothes she was wearing, put the hospital papers in a plastic bag, and she left, with the baby in her arms, with nowhere to go. The city seemed bigger now, colder, more distant. She walked. She walked until her legs ached, until the weight of her body and her son broke her back, until her knees almost gave way. When she stopped in front of the Community Assistance Center, she hesitated. The sign was old, the walls dirty, but there was a light inside, and within the light, perhaps an opportunity. The man at the reception barely looked at her. He filled out a form in a hurry. He asked short questions. Name, age, how many children, at-risk situation. She only answered with her head. They sent her to an emergency shelter. A temporary place, they said. Just for a few days. A room with 2 other mothers. Bunk beds, thin mattresses, a damp smell. But there was a roof, hot water, a borrowed bottle. The first night, Ilara cried in silence, her back to the wall. The other mothers were sleeping. One was snoring. The other was mumbling in her dreams. The baby cried too, a high-pitched, insecure cry. She cradled him, even though her arms ached. She sang something improvised, voicelessly, and he fell back asleep. The next morning, she received a package of used diapers, a change of donated clothes, a cold coffee. All of it hard, all of it foreign, but enough to continue. The following days dragged on. Noises, lines, voices, hurried social workers, children running in the hallways, mothers yelling from exhaustion. Ilara felt invisible. But every time she looked at her son, something inside her held her up. Even if it was, just barely. The third day dawned gray. The rain had returned, soft but constant. In the dining hall, someone dropped a tray. A child screamed. Another fell. A woman was crying in a corner. Elara stepped away. She sat in the hallway, with the baby in her arms, her forehead resting against the cold wall. She took a deep breath. She smelled his diaper, the warmth of his little body against her chest, the feeling of dissolving inside. Then she did something she hadn't done in a long time. She took out her phone. It was off. The battery had died 2 days earlier. One of the shelter workers lent her a charger. Elara waited for it to get to 5%. She was trembling. She didn't know what she was going to say, but she knew who she was going to call. The contact list was empty. Almost all the old numbers had been erased, but her mother's number was still there. Almost automatic, as if the phone knew that when everything is over, that's where you return. She called once, twice, 3 times, 4. The call was disconnected. She was about to give up, but she called again. This time, someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was low, tired, familiar. Elara swallowed. "Mom," silence. From the other side, the sound of a sigh. An empty space between one sentence and another that said everything. "Come home," just that. No questions, no reproaches, no judgment. And that simple answer was like a crack, a fissure that broke everything she had been holding in. She hung up before her mother could say anything else. Then she cried. But not like before, not from desperation. She cried from relief, from shame, from a forgotten love that was still there, waiting for her. She looked at the baby. He was awake, moving his hands in the air, as if he was trying to touch the world. She caressed his face with her fingers, and in that instant, without the strength to promise anything, she just thought, "I will never again let anyone extinguish who I am." Because she knew it. She knew she had let herself shrink, disappear, fade away little by little. But now, someone depended on her light, on her warmth, on her presence, on her love, and that would be bigger than any fear, a new identity. In the afternoon, she spoke with the social worker. "I have somewhere to go now." The woman seemed relieved, one less person to worry about. She made some calls, arranged the departure. Elara took a bag with donated clothes, wrapped herself in a blanket, and protected the baby from the wind. She got on a bus with her last few coins. She sat by the window. She held her son like someone carrying the most valuable thing in the world. The trip lasted almost 2 hours. The road seemed longer than she remembered, but her eyes were firm, her body wounded. The tiredness was still there. The pain, too. But something else was being born inside. It wasn't just motherhood. It was a kind of courage that appears when there is no other option. When the bus stopped, she got off carefully. The street was the same as before. The iron gate, the window with the plants, the smell of the neighbors cooking. Elara took a deep breath. She rang the doorbell. The door opened. Her mother was there, older than she remembered, smaller, but with the same eyes. Eyes that recognized her immediately, without needing explanations. They didn't say anything to each other. Her mother opened her arms. Elara stepped inside, and in that small space, smelling of the past, she knew it was the right place. Her grandmother took the baby with trembling hands. The baby looked at her. Then he looked at Elara. And for the first time since everything fell apart, the house was filled with warmth. Dinner was simple. Rice, beans, a fried egg. But Elara ate like someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Because it was true. Afterward, she took a long bath. She washed her hair. She looked at her body in the mirror. Still wounded. Still fragile. But whole. She put on an old cotton nightgown. The same one she used as a teenager. She lay down with her son in her arms. Her mother turned off the light, and in the darkness, the baby moved his hand, as if looking for her breast. She gave it to him. He nursed, and in that moment, without speaking, without promising, without planning, she knew it. Nothing would ever stop her again. Now, it was her for herself, and for him. Always. Her mother's house was small, simple, without luxuries. But it had something Alara hadn't felt in a long time. Security. For the first time since everything fell apart, she slept without fear of being thrown out, without having to measure her words, without shrinking. The days began to organize themselves into a routine. She woke up early, took care of the baby, helped her mother with meals, and in her free time, she studied alone. She reread old notes, borrowed books from the public library, and took handwritten notes in old notebooks. The city where she grew up seemed different now. She was also different. The places from her childhood, the streets where she walked when she was just a girl full of plans, now seemed like distant fragments of a life left behind. Still, she didn't want to go back to who she was. She wanted to be more. She wanted to be someone else. She wanted to rebuild herself. It wasn't easy, nothing was. Alara needed money. She knew that depending on her mother was temporary, and that her son needed more than a roof and rice with an egg. He needed a foundation, a strong woman as a reference. She started by selling cakes. She used her grandmother's recipe, adapted it, tested it in her mother's kitchen, and put them in plastic jars with a simple handmade label, Sweet Light. She went out into the street with her backpack full and her son in his stroller. She knocked on the doors of hair salons, stationery stores, schools. Some people bought out of pity, others out of courtesy, but some came back for more. At the end of the month, she paid a portion of the household bills. For the first time, she put money on the table and felt proud. She worked at events. She cleaned school bathrooms. She took care of an old lady some nights. Everything that came up, she did. At night, when the baby was asleep, she studied. And on weekends, she took her son in her arms, sat in the town's central square, and watched people pass by. Almost no one recognized her, and those who did pretended not to see her. She didn't care. There was something bigger now. Herself. She started using her full name again. Alara Herrera, a last name she had left behind when she believed that a man's love was worth more than her own identity. Now, it was the other way around. She signed that name with strength, with truth, a new legacy. One day, in a circle of mothers at the health center, she heard one of them talking about being threatened by her ex. The woman was trembling as she spoke. Alara didn't know what to say, but she offered to help. She wrote down her name. She looked up information on the internet about women's rights. She wrote a note explaining how to file for a restraining order. The next day, she returned to the center just to give it to her. The woman cried. Other mothers began to seek her out. Some wanted guidance. Others just wanted to be heard. Alara wasn't a social worker or a lawyer, but she was something few people were. Someone who had gone through all of that herself. She decided to transform that into something bigger. She created a WhatsApp group, Women in Motion. At first there were 5, then 10, then 20. She got a borrowed room at the neighborhood church. She held bi-weekly meetings. She invited volunteer psychologists. She recorded videos with her old phone and uploaded them to social media. One of them went viral. The video had a simple caption, "Women who fell," but chose to get up. Her voice was firm, but emotion cracked her words. "I'm not strong because I want to be. I'm strong because I had no choice. But today, I choose to transform the pain into a path." Thousands of people saw it, commented, shared. She received messages from everywhere, people thanking her, people asking for help, people offering support. A local report came out, then a note in a national publication. Suddenly, Elara Herrera was a reference. An NGO contacted her to offer a partnership. In a short time, she officially founded her own project. Reborn, a support network for women at risk. She got a space, donations, volunteers, and more than all that, respect. Her son grew up watching everything up close. He was the one who helped hand out flyers. He slept on her lap during meetings. He sat in a corner while she gave talks. He drew with markers on the charts. He knew the names of the women. He called all of them Aunt. Elara took care of her son, like she took care of the world, with patience, with strength, with truth. Sometimes she would cry in secret. She still felt fear. She still had doubts. But she kept going, because she didn't allow herself to stop. She was invited to speak at events, to give interviews, to coordinate projects with municipalities. Everything happened faster than she imagined, but never outside of what she believed. From a shelter to the top, but without forgetting where she came from. One of the most memorable nights was when she received a Women's Leadership Award. She was on stage, her son sitting in the front row. He wore a small, improvised suit and held a paper flower that he had made himself. As she gave her speech, Elara swallowed her emotions. The auditorium was silent. She spoke calmly. When I was thrown out into the street, pregnant, I thought everything was over, that my story would only be about pain. But then he was born, and it was as if someone had turned on the light again. My son didn't just save me. He showed me who I am. She looked at the boy, and I promised him that I would do everything necessary for him to grow up seeing a woman standing, strong, present, not afraid to exist. Applause, people crying, cameras filming, but she only saw her son smiling, proud. Elara got off the stage and he ran to her. He hugged her legs and told her in her ear, "Mom is a giant." She laughed. She knelt down, lifted him into her arms, and she whispered, "And you are my reason." It was for him, always, the man who was nothing. Julian looked at his phone for the 100th time that morning. No response. No notification. No opportunity. The room, once impeccable, was now taken over by crumpled papers, empty glasses, and the remnants of days badly lived. The sofa where Isabella used to lounge had a wine stain. The whole place looked abandoned from the inside, exactly like him. He leaned against the wall, his eyes fixed on a random spot. It was over. The company, the woman, the illusion of control. Everything. At the last meeting with investors, he tried to convince them that it was just a bad streak, that the market was unstable, that they would soon grow again. But no one believed him anymore, not even himself. His luxury car had been repossessed. The employees began to sue him. The press exposed him. And Isabella? Isabella took everything she could, even the shared account that, out of naivete or vanity, he had left in her name. When he found out, he tried to call her. He sent her messages. She read them and blocked him. In their last conversation, before she disappeared, she was direct. "You lost the only thing that was worth it when you threw that woman out of your house. The rest was just pure decoration." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The few friends he had left disappeared when the parties ended. When the dinners with expensive wine turned into solitary dinners, with cold pizza and a silent television. But the worst part wasn't the ruin, or the betrayal. It was the emptiness, The image of Alara haunted him. At first, with contempt, as if she had been a burden he had to endure. Then, as a memory of something he had lost, and that would never return. He started drinking in the afternoons, then in the mornings, then at any time. He wanted to convince himself that it was just to relax, but deep down, he just wanted to stop feeling. One morning, in the middle of a hangover, he woke up on the kitchen floor. He had vomited near the sink. He was cold and hungry, and he had a kind of longing that no words could hold. He got up, swaying, took out his phone, and opened Alara's profile. He didn't have the courage to follow her. He just watched. The photos showed a firm woman with a serene gaze. There was a strength in her he hadn't known before, and the boy was identical to her. But in his eyes, there was something of him too. A shadow of the past that somehow was still alive there. He started thinking about his son. He had never seen him. He had never held him in his arms. He had never heard his voice. He only knew he existed. And that now was what hurt the most. He sent flowers, an expensive bouquet with a handwritten card. "Forgive me for everything. I want to meet my son." Silence. He tried to write a letter. He wrote and ripped it up. Then another, and another. On the 5th attempt, he carefully folded it and sent it by mail. He waited for days. Nothing. Finally, he decided to write directly. An email. Cold. Desperate. "I don't want to come back. I just want to meet him. See his face. I know I was wrong, and I know I don't deserve it. But he has a right to know who I am." The response arrived the next day. Short, sharp, clear. "You lost the only woman who made you look like a man, and that boy already has the hero he needs. I am." He reread the message 5 times. Then he closed the computer and stayed silent. He didn't shed a single tear. There was nothing left to cry about. He spent the rest of the day sitting in the darkness, thinking, remembering. From the day he met her, from how she looked at him, with that childlike sparkle of someone who believes that love saves. From how she held his hand, without asking for anything in return. From how he mocked her purity. From how he broke something he could never put back together. Deep down, he knew he was never a man for her. He was only the reflection of what she wanted to see, and when she finally saw who he was, it was too late. Now Alara was a respected woman, a symbol, and he was just another man who destroyed everything he touched. He left the apartment for the first time in days. His face was tired, his beard neglected. He walked the streets trying to understand where he had gotten lost. The answer was obvious, but he still didn't know how to face it. He stopped in front of the NGO's headquarters. He saw a poster from a distance with Alara's face smiling, alongside other women. There was something in that smile that seemed unattainable, an irreversible distance. He didn't have the courage to go in, or to wait. He just stood there, as if that place was a grave where he had buried the only good version of himself. He went away. That night he dreamed of his son. He couldn't see him clearly. It was just a boy running, laughing, playing. He tried to reach him, but the boy always turned the corner before he could, always escaped. He woke up soaked in sweat, his heart racing, and with an unbearable certainty, he was not part of his son's life, and he wouldn't be. He took the last bottle of whiskey from the shelf and emptied it into the sink. The bottle shattered at the bottom, and the smell spread. It was the first time he had done it, without an audience, without promises, just him and the shame. The next day, he called a rehabilitation center. He asked for help. He gave his name, and he waited. The voice on the other end said there was a place. He took a deep breath. He knew he wasn't starting from scratch. He was starting from -1,000. But he had to do something other than just lament. He got in the car. He drove in silence. No music, no distractions. For the first time, perhaps he was willing to feel everything he had avoided for years. Because, in the end, his fall wasn't when he lost the money, or when Isabella betrayed him, or when his friends disappeared. The real fall was the moment he lost the woman who saw a better man in him. And now, all that was left was the sound of his own conscience. Heavy, but necessary. The unspoken waltz. The hall was lit with soft, golden lights that fell from the ceiling as if the night had been carefully designed to happen there. The round tables were dressed in white and wine. The china was perfectly aligned. The glasses were gleaming, and the smiles were rehearsed. There were journalists at the entrance, politicians disguised as philanthropists, businessmen interested in alliances, and photographers attentive to every gesture of the night's hostess. Ilara walked into the center of the hall with her son at her side. He wore a navy blue suit, fitted to his small body. But in his eyes, he carried a maturity that didn't match his age. He was a reflection of the woman who had raised him. Firm steps, a direct gaze. They walked as if they belonged not just to that event, but to the world they were building outside of it. She greeted the guests with courtesy, without exaggeration. She knew that half of them were there for prestige, not for the cause. But that didn't affect her. She also knew that even the opportunistic presence of some would serve the NGO. And that was enough. She had learned, with pain, that you cannot expect purity from everyone, but you can take advantage of even the vanity of others. The background music was discreet. A string trio played something soft in a corner. The bar was serving sparkling wine. And on the screen, images of the NGO were projected. Photos of women rebuilding their stories, children smiling, renovated shelters, schools under construction. It was the most important night of Ilara's public career, the most visible, the most symbolic, but not the most difficult. The difficult nights were silent, nights without dinners, without cameras, without beautiful dresses. She knew it, and that's why she didn't flinch when she saw Julian. He stood on the edge of the room in a dimly lit corner, like someone who had come in uninvited. His suit was ill-fitting, his face was dejected, and his gaze was different. He looked smaller, thinner, as if time had passed him by more quickly. He carried a bouquet of flowers in his hands, and a plea in his eyes. Ilara didn't stop walking. She continued to greet guests. She smiled at a diplomat. She talked to a journalist. She served her son a glass of water. All with calm, with elegance, with control. But deep down, she knew. She felt it. Julian wouldn't leave without approaching. And he did. He waited for the first intermission of the night. When the musicians took a break, when everyone was busy with their glasses and comments, then he crossed the room toward her. She saw him coming. She didn't move. She didn't step back. She just squeezed her son's hand more firmly, and he immediately perceived the weight of that gesture. Julian stopped in front of them. His eyes were moist, the face of someone who has nothing left to hide, because he has already lost everything. "Forgive me, Ilara," he said in a trembling voice. "I beg you, let's start over. For us. For our son." Ilara didn't answer right away. There was silence all around. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel inside. The tension was thin, sharp. She looked at the man in front of her, and for a second she saw flashes of the past, the apartment where they lived, the party, the rain, the impact, the hospital gurney. but she also saw who she had become. The path, the blood, the rebuilding. And she understood that there was no new beginning with someone who was her end. She took a deep breath. She took a step forward, just enough to look him in the eye. Without fear, without anger, without debt. "You don't deserve my contempt." The phrase came out clean, direct, without needing to raise her voice. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't begging. She wasn't justifying. She was just telling the truth. Julian lowered his gaze. He tried to say something, but his lips only trembled. The bouquet fell to the floor, and no one bent down to pick it up. Ilara turned to her son, who was looking at her with eyes too mature for his age. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. She took his hand tightly, and together, they walked away from that scene. "Come on, son. We have a world to conquer." And they left. The dinner continued. The guests toasted again. The music started playing again. But something in that room had changed. A presence had dissolved. A past had been returned to its place. Ilara didn't look back. She knew the cycle had closed, that this was the last piece missing to seal everything that tied her to what was once pain. Now, she was another woman, and he was the son of a woman who was impossible to break. The final dance, the night was already well advanced when Ilara left the main hall. Guests were still milling around the tables, some toasting, others taking photos. The music was still low, filling the air with a breath of elegance and repose. But she needed air. She went out the back, walking to the garden. She was barefoot now. She had taken off her heels halfway through dinner without anyone noticing. Her feet touched the damp grass, and her long dress moved with the light breeze of that clear night. She stopped by the fountain. The water made a soft, constant sound, like a quiet breath. She inhaled deeply and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. She closed her eyes for an instant. The night seemed to extend around her like a calm embrace. It was strange to allow herself that silence without guilt, without fear that it would be interrupted by pain. For the first time, silence was just that. Silence. Not absence, not abandonment, not rejection. It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, without urgency, without threat. She turned slowly. He was there. Tall, in a dark suit, his hair slightly disheveled like someone who doesn't care about appearances, but still pays attention to every detail. The smile wasn't broad. It was contained, respectful, confident. And his gaze didn't say, "I want you." It said, "I see you. May I have this dance?" The phrase came with the simplicity that only true things bring with them. There was no forced gallantry, no rushed desire. It was just an invitation. Ilara hesitated. She looked at her own feet. She remembered everything she had been, everything she had survived. She thought about her tired body, the invisible marks, the heart she had mended alone, with pure courage. But then she looked at him, and she saw something she didn't expect. It wasn't salvation. It was presence. She breathed, and she extended her hand. "Yes," he approached unhurriedly. He put one hand on her back, the other held hers firmly, but gently. They began to dance right there, between the sound of the fountain and the distant murmur of the party, without music, without rehearsal, without promises. The dance was slow, almost motionless, but alive. She felt the rhythm of his body, the discreet warmth that emanated from that contact, the security of someone who doesn't try to dominate, but to accompany. And she let her feet slide without fear. As they swayed gently under the garden lights, Ilara looked back into the hall, through the glass. She saw her mother sitting, with her grandson in her arms. He was sleeping peacefully, his face resting on his grandmother's shoulder, his hands loose, his eyelashes long like hers. "He was my beginning," she whispered, without looking away. The man didn't ask anything. He just squeezed her hand tenderly. She looked at him again. "And now, I'm starting to live for myself too." This time, his smile was wider, but still contained, as if to say, "I understand. And I'm in no hurry." They continued to dance in silence. She didn't need to know his name yet, or his past, or his intentions, because for the first time she was dancing because she wanted to, not out of fear of loneliness, not out of a need for acceptance, but because she felt she could. Time stretched in that dance, and Alara understood, without anyone explaining it to her, that some songs don't end when the melody fades. Some dances continue inside you, and others only begin when you learn to choose who to dance with. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew who she was now, and that was everything. Questions for the reader. How does Alara's journey from victim to a giant redefine what it means to be a hero in a story? What is the significance of the unspoken waltz with the new man? And how does it contrast with her relationship with Julian? The story suggests that Alara's fall was not her end, but her beginning. How does this theme challenge conventional ideas about failure and success?